Welcome back to the Williams Real Estate Channel. I'm your host, Geordie Williams. Today, we are discussing whether or not you should be buying a commercial property in 2025. The truth about commercial property. So, before you think, who's this residential buyer's agent talking down property? I'm a realist and I came out of the property and construction industry, worked with large institutions. I've seen it all. I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly. And I'll explain things today that you probably won't hear from companies that push only commercial property, as they obviously have a vested interest to keep buying that type of stock and pushing people into it. But as you'll gather from today, it is definitely not my pick right now in terms of the market cycle to be getting into commercial property. We will look to get into commercial property down the line, but not towards the tail end of the land boom of where we sit now in the 18-year land cycle. So with that said, we will run through a few key facts first before we'll dig deep into why I believe it's not the best time to be chasing commercial. But before that, we want to understand, how do you actually value a commercial property? There's four main ways to value a commercial property. The main way, the most typical way, is the income capitalization method of using how much income that property makes to then work backwards based off a return, typically 5 to 6% cap rate, will then give you a value of what the property is worth based off the income. Second to that is you can look at replacement costs, so how much it costs for the land, building construction, tax, interest, holding costs if you were to build that same property from scratch in the current market. That's another way you can value a property, a commercial property. Comparable sales, you can look to find similar sales within the same area, within the same region, the same type of property. If it's a commercial shop front, retail space, if it's an office space, if it's a warehouse, you can look to find the same size property with a square meter rate that has sold in the last 6 to 12 months. You can use that method, or you can also use the hypothetical development upside of a property. So if you can calculate the end value through sales of a development, for example, if you were to buy a commercial site like a factory that is zoned for residential, so you could develop the site by knocking down the old factory, building 50 units, and if each of those units were end value of, call it $1 million each unit, and it costs to build 600,000, you can work out the end value of that commercial site based off the future value of the site after doing a development. So there's many ways to skin a cat, but the main way that most people and I guess buyers agents look to value a property is using the income capitalization rate. So how that one works, that first dot point, is you calculate the rental income, the annual rental income, so how much money you receive every year, minus the operating costs, will give you the NOI, the net operating income. The NOI is then divided by the capitalization rate, which will then give you the property value. So as an example, we have a property that is bringing in 120,000 of rental income minus 20,000 of operating expenses, provides 100,000 NOI. We then start with 100,000 NOI divided by a 5% cap rate. This can be 5%, 6%, however, what cap rate you are desiring for, but fair value is 5%. And if you're getting a 5.5%, 6%, 7%, then that's an undervalued asset. But just for this example, we'll use a 5% fair value equals $2 million for that property based off the NOI return that it's receiving. So that is a way that is typically used to value a commercial property. The trouble is, what happens when it goes vacant, which can happen during the downturns, during the mid-cycle slowdowns, or the end-of-cycle land-driven downturns. Commercial property can go vacant if the business goes broke. So during tough times, when we are in a recession or a downturn and businesses can't stay afloat, if they go broke, they can't pay rent. If they can't pay rent, they vacate the building, and then the building is left vacant and can be left vacant for many years. So what happens in this scenario? Well, you can then no longer use the income capitalization method to value the property because it has no income. So how do you then value it? Well, you then use the replacement costs, so how much it costs for the land to build, the structure, if it's a retail shop front or if it's a office building or if it's a warehouse, how much does it cost to build, the replacement costs, comparable sales, or if it's got any development upside. So it'll strike off that ability for you to value the property using the income because there is no income. So what happens during this scenario? This is the truth about commercial property, which you won't hear from the commercial property spruikers. So I'm a realist. I'm not here to talk down any type of asset. I believe in all types of asset class, including if it's entry-level units, villas, townhouses, houses, duplexes, blocks of units, commercial. They all play their part in building a large sustainable portfolio, but there's always a time to buy each type of property because not every type of property will have its time in the sun all the time. There's downturns that come around, and when they do, and we're due for one around the corner, commercial property has shown in history during the mid-cycle slowdown, such as the COVID recession or the dot-com bust recession, or the end-of-cycle recessions such as the GFCs or the 91 downturn, the recession you had to have. The next land-driven downturn will be like the 91 recession we had to have. It's due come 2027. During these downturns, vacancies for commercial property can last 2 to 4 years, typically 2 years during the mid-cycle and up to 4 years during the end of cycle downturns, the larger land-driven downturns that are more significant and more severe. So if that occurs and the property goes vacant, in order to value that property, as I said before, you can only rely on the replacement costs, the comparable sales, and if it's got development upside. And if you can't support the asset during that vacancy period, which can be up to 4 years, well, then you probably should not buy it because it can wipe you out. If you can't meet your mortgage repayments, your land tax, your interest holding costs, insurance, maintenance, upkeep of the site, while you're trying to find another tenant, which can be be for many years, then the banks will want their loans back and they'll sell it to the next person. So you're going to be very cautious, especially this time of the cycle, because when the market does turn, and if you do lose your tenants, the value can get wiped out at least 50%, if not 60, 70%. So this is why banks also require minimum 50% down payment deposits for commercial property, is because they know that these downturns come around every 7 to 10 years. The 18-year land cycle will give you that framework to understand when we're due for each downturn, at which point commercial property gets hammered the hardest. Second to that is that high-end residential real estate, like the mansions, blue chip stock can come back 20, 30%. The midpoint of residential in that 1 to 1.5 is pretty stable. But the lower ends, the entry-level stock, which we are now specializing in buying today, rises because the demand will shift to the affordable end. So commercial property in the current market in 2025 is a high risk in terms of the market timing of when to buy this type of property. The best time to buy is during the downturns. If you can buy a site, a commercial property that's vacant, you'll get it 50% on discount. And then if you can fill the space, then you can double, if not triple, the value of the site, because then you can use the capitalization method of valuing the property, where you then add value and then you may want to keep for long-term, refinance, or sell on to the next person who's wanting to take on that asset. But if you're solely relying on the capitalization rate to buy an asset, that is a high risk way of buying commercial property, because you are essentially paying for that income. And if that income disappears, if the tenant goes broke, you can lose easy 50% of the value of that property. And if you can't float it for up to 4 years, as I said before, it can wipe you out. I'm not here to talk down this asset class. I'm all for it. We will eventually get into it. But as it stands of today, personally myself, I've got 17 residential investment properties across New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, consisting of individual townhouse, villa-style properties in a complex, 10 or so houses, duplex, and a block of units, block of 4 units. Personally, I'm not comfortable at the current point of the cycle and at my current real estate holdings of that much property, which is worth about 8 million. I've got about 3.5 million in debt. Personally, I'm not ready to get into commercial property. I've helped a few people already that have been pushed into getting into commercial too early. You need to build that solid base. If you don't have the cash in the bank or a solid residential foundation portfolio that can support a commercial asset vacant for up to 4 years, if you don't have that, you shouldn't buy it, because it will wipe you out. If it goes vacant and you can't support it, no one's going to be there to save you. So, and if you're then left in negative equity because you paid based off the cap rate during the boom, and then the business goes broke, then that's the stuff that can send you bankrupt. So I'm a realist. I've seen it all before. I've worked in the institutions. I came from the property construction industry. I have not come from an engineering background or an IT background. I came right from property investing and property development industry. So I know how it works. And we are aspiring to get into commercial property, but now is definitely not the time, as I'll show you soon some data points. But this is the 18-year land cycle. I use it as a framework to invest. And we are on the blue marker, 12 months away from peak market come April 26th. Between April 26 to August 26, the market's going to top out, and then we'll enter the next land-driven downturns. The likes of Darwin, regional Queensland, WA, South Australia, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide will get hit the hardest as they have had the most significant bull run in recent years. However, Sydney, Melbourne will be the most resilient as they haven't had as much growth leading up to this peak of the market, and they'll actually perform and outperform throughout the recovery come 27, 28 and onwards, like what they did between 2007, 2008, big boom for 10 years up to 2017 in the first half of the current cycle. So we use this as a framework to understand, firstly, where do we sit in the market, being currently equivalent point of time in the prior cycle would be 2006, about 12 months away now from peak market, when the market will turn and the fundamentals will change. I cannot stress this enough. The fundamentals will change. So if you're buying a commercial property today based off a cap rate, the fundamentals will change when the market turns. If you lose your tenant, which there is a probability of that happening, then you can no longer use the cap rate because there is no cap rate, there is no income, and you have to use the replacement cost. And pretty much during a downturn, the banks go into a credit squeeze to try and shore up their balance sheets. They don't typically lend that much during the downturns. It'll be hard to get money. And if you got no tenant, people won't be able to get the money to buy it. You'll be selling to cash buyers and it'll pretty much be worth land value. So now is definitely a very dangerous time to get into commercial. And typically we find towards the tail end of these booms, like what we are now, where interest rates rise because the economy is strong, people tend to chase yield because with the rates higher, they're chasing yield. So they're chasing commercial property. They're chasing an asset that will give them that return. But when the market turns and switches off, and if the tenant can't pay your rent, then you will technically overpay for that property. So hold that mindset now. We are in 2006 equivalent point of time. 2007 was peak market GFC. So we are in that similar point of the cycle. I'm now going to bring up some data that I've gone through and found. It is a little bit more tricky finding data for commercial property. It's not as accessible as residential, but this will explain to you how I see commercial property getting hammered in the next couple of years. So this is in Brisbane, in Woodridge, around half an hour south of Brisbane, 45 minutes north of the Gold Coast, a commercial asset. And we can see how it has performed historically by studying the sales data. I love studying the sales data. It paints a picture of what actually happened throughout history, so then we can understand where a market can head in the future. So we are in that equivalent point of time in 2006, about a year away from market top 2007, before we'll enter the next GFC-like event. So we can now look at this sales data of this commercial asset and see what happened throughout the last GFC. It was sold in 2001 for 600,000. It then looked to have gone vacant in 2010. So the GFC hit 2008-9. This business that was renting this commercial site obviously went broke or could no longer meet the repayments of the rent, so they vacated the property. It went vacant. How long did it go vacant for? 207 days on market, and looks to have not been actually let, as it was then sold in 2013 at a loss for 467,000. So if you're buying now in commercial asset based off the earnings and you lose the tenant, you'll lose easy 50% of the value, just like has happened with this property. And you may be thinking, oh, well, Geordie, this is just a little shitty, commercial space. It's not blue chips type of stuff. Well, let's see about this one. This is in WA, Perth, big site, 1.3 hectares. The building's 1.3 hectares, pretty big. So, actually, no, sorry, 2,900 meters squared, the internal building, and 1.3 hectares. So, pretty large site. KFC, pretty strong tenant, you'd think. Let's see how this one performed historically. 2005, sold for 5.5 million. So that's a pretty close period of time where we are now. We're in late 2005, early to mid 2006. So this is pretty accurate. And this is the higher end blue chip type of commercial asset you can buy. Obviously, you can go bigger, but this is getting up there. 5.5 million purchase price. Looks to have gone vacant as it was listed for rent in 2007, October 2007, when the GFC hit. Days on market, 322 days. So it's for rent for a year. Can you imagine having a property that big, not bringing in any income and having all the expenses going up for a year? They then decide to sell it as it went for sale in May 2008. Days on market, 751 days. So it looks to have not been rented, leased out through that period, as it sold for 1.5 million in 2011. So this is what can happen. If you buy property based off the earnings, you can overpay, because if the tenant cannot no longer pay that rent, I cannot stress this enough, you can no longer use that way of valuing a commercial property. And it's basically worth land value or replacement value. How much is for the land? How much to build it? And if it's got a tired old building on it, then it's pretty much worth land value. I've seen this many times in my corporate career where developers look to snatch up bargains, big developers, in the downturns. They only buy this type of stock when there's blood on the streets. They sit on them for 5-10 years, develop them, and then sell them peak market. It's classic property cycle. Look, so it was sold in 2000 for 1.2. Looks to have probably then been rented out to the likes of, say, KFC. It was then sold for 5.5 million. That's the best way to buy and sell commercial. You want to buy it vacant, you fill the space. That's when you double, if not triple or quadruple the value. And then if you offload at peak market with the tenant locked in for 10 plus year lease, happy days. You don't want to be on the receiving end of that. You don't want to buy an asset that's got a tenant paying and you're valuing it based off the earnings, because if the earnings goes to zero, well, then you lose easy 50-60% of the value, just like this. And this can be a big hit even for some big players. So you can imagine if you got into this type of asset too early, if you had 3 or 4, 5 residential and you leveraged into an asset worth 5.5 million, you put in 2 million, and then if you lost a tenant, you could be in negative equity. So it's can be a very dangerous asset class to get into, but also can have the good upside. But you need that solid base first. I cannot stress that enough. If you don't have that base that you cannot lean on during the down periods, and if you're forced to sell, that's when it can really hurt and even wipe you out. So this is another classic one. South Australia, same story. This is a warehouse. And let's see what happened. 2005, sold for 662,000, sold in 2009 for 400,000. So lost good 30-40%. And this is Wetherill Park, so in Sydney, another commercial space. Looks to have sold in 2009 for 600 and then sold in 2020 for 187,000. So cannot stress it enough. We are in the point of the cycle now of 2005 2006. We are hitting the limits of this market cycle when it is not the most wise decision to get into commercial property based off the earnings that the property is providing. Wait 2 or 3 years down the track when there's blood on the streets and you'll be able to buy the same property if it's vacant for half the price. So if you are looking to get into commercial, and this is what I'm planning to do, once I probably get to around 30 residential properties, I'm at 17 now, so I want to probably have at least double. And how I'll do that is I'm going to start selling down my singular properties to then roll them into smaller blocks of units, blocks of 3s, blocks of 4s, residential blocks of units. They're the most resilient type of property. There's never enough stock of affordable accommodation and there's always demand. We are in the lucky country. We've got a booming population. We're only at the start of our growth trajectory. We are like the next America. In the next 100 years, we'll grow to being probably a leading power in 200 or 300 years' time. So we are only at the start. So we are in the beautiful industry of buying and investing in property. So blocks of units is a good entry landing point if you're looking to get into commercial, because it's very resilient. A block of units, which is residential units over 4, so a block of 5 plus, is considered a commercial asset. So entry level stuff, start with that. Blocks of 5s to 10s, 20s, and then ease into commercial, ease into boarding houses. This is a boarding house, 18, 20 rooms. You always find people who need accommodation. So that's a good way to ease into commercial, not jumping straight into retail or industrial or office space where they can have those extended 2 to 4 year vacancies where you can lose easy 50% of the value and have to float the site for that long until you find another tenant. These types of assets are commercial, but they're very resilient. And you always find tenants wanting a roof over their head. Affordable accommodation is what it is. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you need any help buying blocks of units or boarding houses, shoot me an email, send me some feedback. If you've been talking to commercial buyers agents in the, trying to push you into that stock and you want to have a conversation around whether or not it's the right time for you or the point of the cycle, happy to chat. Send me an email, send me your details. We can jump on a call. We can discuss your plans and how we could even work together moving forward. Until next time, thank you very much for watching.